Okay, in this video I'd like to go over the work from week 2 and to help you get ready for week 3, because if you can believe it, that will be halfway through this term. So I really want to make sure that you're on the right footing and that you've been able to connect the work from week 1 and week 2 to now a little bit harder work in week 3. So this was all about kind of letting you settle in and learning that you're going to be doing some of the assessing or some of the grading yourself. So we start with the introduction to ungrading, and there was quite a good conversation, and you had a lot of questions and comments about this approach. And it also shows me that now you're getting the hang of doing the annotations, which, as many of you are starting to notice, is a helpful tool for learning, but it's also helpful for me to see how you're doing. Also doubling up on that, I did the course check-in just to make sure that everything's going okay and to see how you're progressing with some of the work. Now, I think the first real kind of difficult reading at this time was Violence in the Word, so we'll spend some time with that so you kind of understand. I don't want to say this is a trick, but it's a way of getting you to learn about the history of the United States legal system without repeating all of the same things that you probably learned in high school or in your American government class. And so this is more about helping you understand the context so that you can be better informed about how the legal system actually operates, not how the quote-unquote founders maybe thought it would or what they wanted it to do, but what does it actually do. So there's a great story, short story that was made into a video that gives you the background for this concept, and so we'll go over some of those details as well. And really this was to help you kind of put those two things together. So ideally you would have read the reading and then you'd watch the video, although you could do it the other way around. And you start to understand like how violence and the word being what's going on, what's the actuality, what do judges actually do, how that actually works out together. And then from there, you'd then start to expand your mind by thinking about 3 different legality narratives. And so you'd start to realize that there's not one view of the legal system, it's not just one set of rules, but there's actually a political struggle over who gets represented, whose rules those are, and how do they affect people. And so we'll go into some of that. And then finally, of course, you have a quiz here to just let you know how you are doing. And so you'll check that number. The number that you get in Blackboard will be the number of correct answers you had on the quiz. If it's helpful for you, you might want to reach out to me if you're struggling with any particular area, and we can go over some of those details. But in general, right, this is just kind of a way to help you assess yourself, how to grade yourself. So let me apply kind of the big picture here by helping you understand kind of 2 huge concepts in as practical way as I can think of, which is kind of this assumption or this concept that students usually bring into the classroom ever since I've been teaching, that also if you do a quick Google search, Google, which again is the most crowd-searched response, it's not the correct response, it's the majoritarian response, and it'll be that it's a set of rules. It's kind of like calling a steak or hamburger or vegetables food, right? It's like, thank you for the classification, but it really doesn't tell me anything about what's inside of the food. Is it healthy food? Is it going to help me? How do people respond to food differently? Do some people like some food? Is it different based by culture, right? So all of these kind of questions that come up when you're studying something don't get answered very well when you just say it's a rule. It's also not really technically just a rule. Many times it's a principle, so somehow that's different than a rule, and so you just want to kind of think about it. For the legal system, though, what we mean by maintaining is that over time, the rules and principles are established. So it's not like they found a rule, they were digging in their backyard and they found a rule and they said, let's apply this. That's how a lot of you talk about judges, as if they're supposed to apply something that they found somewhere. It's the other way around. It's people come to the courts with conflicts ever since the Industrial Revolution, and they have usually they're commercial or property conflicts, and so judges are responding to those people's arguments. So they're establishing rules, they're coming up with principles based on those arguments, not things that they knew about ahead of time. Now, sometimes there are ancient disagreements. So custody of children, whether someone should be allowed to get a divorce, whether if I build my property on top of what you thought was your property, right? These have been principles that have been argued about for thousands of years. And so there are some sayings that come from, which we call maxims, M-A-X-I-M, that sometimes get thrown into the rule. They say, you know, for 2,000 years we've said if you build a fence, it's your property. And so, you know, there are sometimes that situation, but 99.9% of the time, it's the rules and principles are coming out of the argument, out of the two arguments that are being forward. So let's just apply this, right? So we're taking the principle of rules, and so according to you, again, I disagree with this, but I've been doing this a long time, and I went to law school, right? And I have a legal education. So you're kind of entering into thinking like a lawyer, or starting to think about the legal system. So you believe that rules are hard, that they're concrete, and everybody has to follow them. And that's one of the reasons why you think grading should be left to the teacher to give you an accurate and fair, neutral assessment of yourself, because you can't be trusted to decide what you've learned and what you haven't learned. This is what most of you have argued. So in this way, if we're applying that principle, then teachers are like judges, right? Where you have a dispute, you're bringing information in, and here I am basing it on some rule I dug up in my backyard, giving you an A or a B or a C or a D. So then grading is like a sentence in a criminal case. If I give you an F, you're guilty. If I gave you an A, you're innocent. And so you can move on, or you've got to go back, right? So the fundamental question that I asked you was, so as fun as this probably is for most instructors, right, to be able to sentence you to an F or sentence you to an A, why would any sane person give up this power? So you've got a little question here. So do you share your power or don't share? So if I don't share my power, then I'm maintaining a system of unequal power, where I have more power than you as the student, and that maintains the system of social control. I'm here to socialize you into behaving a right way, and if you behave the right way and you say the right things and you get the right answers, then I'm supposed to give you an A according to my peers, right, to maintain this domination system. If I'm an authoritarian, or if I'm in a theocracy, or if I'm in a system that doesn't care about democracy, then this is obvious. This is what I'm supposed to do. But if I'm in a democratic system where we're supposed to be equal according to you and other people, you say everybody's equal, and that the law or the rules are supposed to be applied equally and neutrally, and all these kind of ideals that you're going to say that you have, then we have to challenge an unequal relationship. There shouldn't be any unequal relationships in the system, because that would promote unequal, arbitrary bias, where my beliefs and my ideas and what I think is supposed to be correct, the way you're supposed to be behaving, sometimes even the way you're dressing and talking, that would be up to me. It's not a mutual discussion. There's no negotiation. I just have the power, and you didn't necessarily decide that you wanted that. You thought you were coming here for an education, not to be judged. And so that's the kind of dilemma, right, that the professor or the quote-unquote teaching judge has to kind of give up. So what I did instead, right, is I've kind of got these two concepts here then that I'm trying to share with you. One is, if you look on the far right side, and I'm going to go over this a few times in this presentation, is that this is how I know you got it. If you understand that law is malleable, it's flexible, it can be changed depending on the situation and the context and the people who are arguing, then I feel great, you're learning law. If you understand that power is exercised, it's not held, it's not something I dig up in my backyard and I grab, I don't get a sword that falls out of the heavens and I go around and use it, but that it's exercised, that it has to do with unequal social structures, it has to do with authority, it has to do with charisma, that there's all these elements to it, then I feel good. You're understanding how the law works within our social system. If you understand that these legality narratives, that at least the three that you're learning here, are integrated into that system, and that those are based on your experience, which is going to be different than mine, different than somebody else, then I feel good that you understand how law really operates, as opposed to believing in some mythical ideal situation. And then if you understand that there's a gap between what the law says, right, what I write down, like thou shalt not kill, and then people go around killing, then I feel better that you understand that it's not automatic and it's not this system that lives in some perfect reality. Most of you, on the other hand, are coming in with this needs revision, this left-hand side thing. You've learned, people have taught you, Google has told you that law is a set of rules that you must follow where there's consequences. But of course, then you realize that there's not always consequences for people who don't follow the law. In fact, more and more so, it seems like there aren't consequences for people who break the law. So your idea that it's rules that must follow doesn't seem to be real. And you could kind of keep going on through this list. And so I'm trying to get you to understand, going from your kind of, you haven't learned that much about the law, what you have learned has been from pop culture or from the media, and that's not going to be as complicated or nuanced or as deep as what we're trying to do in this class. And then the next big thing is to get you to see that criminal justice and legal systems are systems, right? That they're not based on individual preferences, that these are deep, ingrained, they have processes that change people's behavior. They structure how people behave and what they believe, just like education does, or religion and these other systems. But also that they're integrated. So we tend to study them as separate. There's the criminal justice system, then there's the legal system, but they're integrated, right? They overlap. They have places where they share things, they have some things that are different, and to get you to understand that these systems have different goals sometimes. And one of those different goals is that for the criminal justice system, it's to close cases, right? Close cases. Give tickets, give papers that say that this case is closed, right? How many cases have you closed? This is the criminal justice system. So the legal system is supposed to resolve cases that haven't been closed, right? The failures of the criminal justice system to close cases, it's very bad. So the courts have to go in and they have to resolve those open cases. Why is this case hasn't been closed yet? That's what it's really trying to get at. And so crime is socially constructed, right? It's not, again, it's not something I dig back in the backyard and I say, here, I found crime, you've violated it. We decide what's criminal, right? Last year, it was not criminal to get an abortion. Next year, it's criminal in many places to get an abortion. And so it's decided by the social structure, by the people who are arguing, that they're coming with their different perspectives. Now, finally, you know, the key to getting a good grade in most classes is that you've referred to the course materials. That shows me that you're learning and that you can apply the course materials. But you should also be comparing and contrasting that to your lived experiences. How does this support what your standpoint is, the way you see the world? How is this different than your standpoint? What explains the differences? And then that way you can show me that you understand things from multiple points of view, that you don't think that we live in a society where there's only one point of view. And so that's where the rubric comes in. You're going to use the language to show this is why I think I should get an A because I did this, this, and this, and you're going to show me that you understand these things, right? Some of you, if some of you are kind of, trying to figure this out, right, is that you might struggle to get to that point. It might be difficult for you to understand these things, right? These are concepts. These aren't things that you memorize. And so as you go through this class, you have to try to work to understand what these things mean. And of course, you can reach out to me, but you should really definitely be talking with your peers. I'm noticing a lot in the annotations of people are giving you good answers. And so you can start to see, why things are a certain way. Now, for some of you, you're so used to getting points that, I'll ask you, you'll have a final exam, and then when you're self-grading yourself, I say, how well do you think you did on the final exam? Do you think you got at least 20 correct answers? Do you think you got 10 to 20, 5 to 9, 4 if you're fewer? Because that'll give you a better sense of, how do you think you're doing. Now, I wanted to just pull out some of your comments about self-grading because they're great comments, right? And you'll see there's disagreement. There's different points of view. And so one thing I wanted to pull out is because it's similar to the idea of independent judges, is that as much as I'd love to be independent and I strive not to let my bias affect students, it's impossible. There's no such thing as an independent person, right? We're all dependent upon our cultures, our upbringing, our value systems, professional standards, right? There's all these things that influence how I make my decisions. Now, on the other hand, right, your grades, many of you believe, and I used to be like you too, we get the grade we deserve, but it's not really true. As one student over here shows you two ways, the LSAT and the bell curve grading system that most people use. And that's the LSAT for example, is there's no such thing as a perfect score. So you're not getting the grade you deserve. You're getting the punishment you deserve. To be honest, in that system, is that they're focusing on certain weaknesses that you have, and they're trying to see how bad are these weaknesses for you, and are you capable of fixing them, improving them slightly. A lot of them have to do with time. But it has really nothing to do with how much knowledge you have about the legal system or about law. It's really a aptitude test. Whereas the system that most teachers use in the classroom is called the bell curve grading system, in which at least 50% of the students must receive a C in that system. So you're not really getting a C in a class because you deserve a C. You're getting a C because the bell curve says that 50% of the students must get a C. And so the teacher is looking for reasons to give you a C, not looking at your work to decide why you should get a B or an A. That's really what makes the rubric different than the bell curve system. And so, you know, again, like I might say as a professor, well, I'm just being independent, the numbers don't lie. But there's other ways I could be grading you, right? I don't have to grade you based on the bell curve system. I don't have to grade you based on points. Especially systems in which they don't tell you why you got a certain number of points, right? Was it based on correct answers? Was it based on timeliness, right? Lots of teachers deduct points from you for turning in late work, but they don't necessarily tell you that. And so there's lots of bias in the system. Now, on the other hand, most of you have come from New York public schools or from countries in which this system was maintained, and so you've gotten used to it. You know, you got here because you got through that system. And so that's why I'm giving you some points, just to kind of keep you feeling okay about that process. But really, if you want to think about this from a lifelong learning or a democratic learning or a deep learning or an active learning, all these different phrases, you really want to be building upon what you already knew, modifying things that might have been wrong or just a little bit naive or you hadn't considered other points of view, and then you start to build on that. You start to add to it. You reflect on your lived experiences. You compare kind of what a textbook answer would be versus what do you know to be true from your real life, and then compare different viewpoints of other people who've had real life different experiences and that they've got different ideas. And so I just wanted to kind of let you see all these different responses because people are struggling through this process together, and that's, you know, kind of the point, is that it's going to be new for you, and I kind of, you know, quote unquote warned you about that, but to help you, it's okay, right? It's not really a huge deal. You're not going to be hurt from this process. It's just going to be about you trying to learn more and more about this class. So the first thing that you really got to just, you know, I'm giving you like the A here, is that you really have to understand this concept of malleable. And when I always hear that word malleable, for some reason, like dough comes into my head, right? So you've got your flour, your water, your salt, whatever, and you're going to make some bread or something. You're going to make cookies, and what malleable means, you're changing it, right? You're forming it to fit your purposes, and that's really what law is as well. And so you have to think about it from that perspective. Now, if you look carefully here, we've got three narratives of law, and this is going to be a repeating process in this class. And so, sure, law can be formal rules that then come with a consequence, a punishment, and that's domination. That's one player trying to get the other player to do what they want, or else there's going to be a consequence. But it can also be a form of resistance, where that player says, well, I don't think that your rules are fair, or what gives you the right to tell me what to do? And so they have a right? They have justice. There's principles of law that are embedded in the right to resist, as you see in the American Revolution, the right to resist the British domination, or in the right of Martin Luther King Jr. to resist unjust laws of segregation. So then law is also constitutive of these, both the give and take, right? The domination and the resistance. And so that presents a system of which it starts to resemble a game, where you've got two different players going up against each other, and that's what it creates, that structure, right? So law is also that thing that creates the adversarial system. So I pulled out just a few things that I think, you know, if you want to get good at this, you want to be able to get an A, then these are the things you have to kind of focus on. you have to start to identify legal issues. So not what's the political issue or what's the moral issue, you know, not what's right or wrong, but what's the legal issue? What does this have to do with the law? And then you have to locate the relevant authority. Is this legal issue something that Congress needs to do something about? Is it something that the Supreme Court is going to do something about? Is it something that I take to small claims court, landlord-tenant law, right? There's all these different areas of law that really apply, and that's how you know that you're in the right relevant authority, or what we call, as lawyers, we call jurisdiction. Now, you also want to engage in rule-based and analogical reasoning. So you need to get in the habit of saying things like, this case or this situation is like this other situation, and here's why I think it is this way. From that, you'll see that the two things are similar because they have the same principle or the same rule. So you want to start thinking about analogies and really understanding the difference between that kind of argumentation process. And there's lots of stuff on the internet that you could look up to better understand analogies, and you could also ask your English 12 or English 24 professor to help you with that, or somebody from the tutoring center, just to practice learning analogies, which is very important in both criminal justice and legal classes. Now, also to understand that those principles are not set in stone, so to speak. They change over time. And so I know that's difficult for people to really understand when they thought, you know, the rule is the rule and it's always going to apply and this is what judges do, but it's just not real. That's not what really happens. And so you have to start to understand that it's moldable. It changes depending on the situation, the context, the people involved. So that's when you start wanting to identify and evaluate competing arguments. Not all arguments are equal, right? It's not just a system where one side says one thing, the other side says another thing, and then you just say, well, okay, I believe you, right? No, you weigh the strength of the arguments. They're going to say something like, well, I think this case is just like Griswold versus Connecticut, and in that case, the Supreme Court said that the individual has a right to privacy. The other side is going to say, well, no, I don't think that the right to privacy is the same thing as a right to abortion, and so I think my argument is better. And so you see now the court has to go back and they have to read Griswold versus Connecticut, they have to read all the cases in which the argument is relying upon, and then they have to evaluate those competing arguments, say which one is more likely to be correct. So this is not a certain answer, this is an argument, and the court, the judges are going to review the compelling weight, right? Did you give a lot of good reasons for why your case should win and why it's like previous judgments that courts have had? So this whole kind of process is what we call critical reasoning or legal reasoning or critical legal analysis. And so this is going to be based on, as you slowly understand more of the legal principles and that really start to give you why the principles, policies, and values are really what the structure of the law is. So for example, there's this ancient maxim, thousands of years, its Latin is caveat emptor, or the buyer beware. And so you feel like if you buy something and it's defective or it's broken, you feel like you have the right to get your money back. But the courts don't agree with you. They think that you should be smarter when you go to buy something. And so they're only going to side with you if the person was deceptive in hiding the defect. So this usually applies to used cars. This is a very common place where the person says, well, you sold me a lemon. This car was defective. There's nothing stopping you from examining the car at the used car dealership. There's nothing stopping you from bringing a mechanic. There's nothing stopping you from inspecting the car. And so that's why they give you this rule. The legal principle is buyer beware, right? That it might be, it's a used car. It might have problems. You need to do your work. It's not on the other side to show you that the car will never break down. And so unless they intentionally deceived you, the court doesn't agree with you. And so this is what we mean by legal reasoning. Now, you and I can agree that we think that's nonsense and that's not right, and it's going to be much easier to cover up deception than it will be for me to prove that they did deceive me. But that's a moral issue or a political issue if we want to try to turn it into that and take it to the legislature and say we want a law protecting us. But that's not what judges do. So that's why you then learned about what law is, right? It is different things to different people. And so you got 3 different stories about the legal system from 3 different people and their standpoint or their experience with the system. And so lots and lots of people believe in this before the law. They're largely not, I don't know a single lawyer that believes in this, but most people, everyday people, they believe in before the law. And there's this story from Kafka that goes on and on. There's several versions of this, or there's several different stories that he wrote, but the trial is the one that kind of goes really into deep before this, where a lot of people feel there's nothing they can do when they're before the law. The law is this kind of outerly worldly thing that only lawyers understand, and so it's this like formal, ritualistic system. They feel better because they think it's rational, and then it's ordered well, and there's these procedures and rules that everybody follows, and so that's just the way it is. So most of you, when I asked you in the pre-semester survey what you thought judges do or what you thought the judiciary is, this is what you think it is. And again, before you start to study law, this is what most people think the system is. This is why it's so hard to start learning legal concepts. For those of you who have had some experience with injustice, with situations in where it wasn't rational, the system was not free from bias, you tend to understand the resist the law narrative, that it's not objective and fair. It can be arbitrary, it can be against you, and it's not entirely unconstrained, right? There's most of the time the law can't do much, right? So some people have won court cases, for example, in small claims court. I know quite a few people who they get a piece of paper from the judge saying that some person owes them money. Well, that piece of paper doesn't do anything for you. I mean, you can take that piece of paper and you can threaten the person saying, you're going to be in violation of this piece of paper if you don't give me my money. Probably bringing your friend with a baseball bat is probably more effective, but that's illegal, right? But the piece of paper does not guarantee you're going to get the money. So unfortunately, now you go back and get another lawyer, or you got to file the paperwork, and you need to get the marshal's office to enforce that piece of paper for you. So again, right, the law can't really do much. In Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court said that segregated schools are illegal. Most schools in the country are still segregated, so the piece of paper didn't do anything. In fact, New York City is more segregated than Little Rock, Arkansas in 1953 today, right? So, this is the limitation. So people tend to believe that resist the law means that the law is up against them. Now, none of you, right, in your pre-semester answers wrote law as a game, right, that you have to win or lose. And this is because most of you probably haven't had experience winning in the legal system. But you can see that business people, lawyers, and other people in kind of upper middle class situations, they tend to see law this way. And so I put a question mark here just because I don't have any evidence that any of you understand this concept, right? I know you understand the other two, but what you don't understand is the third one, or at least I haven't seen evidence of it. Now, what's strange about that is that most of you believe that law is before the law. It's a set of rules that everyone has to follow with their consequences. But then how do you explain that 43% of you use wrongful conviction as the thing you'd like to change about this perfect, ideal system of rules that has consequences if you don't follow the law? So it seems as though if police and judges don't follow the law, that's okay in your naive kind of approach. But it's just because you haven't actually had to think about this contradiction before, that if law was perfect and had automatic punishment, then wrongful conviction would never happen. So there must be something wrong with the system itself. And so now you're starting to see, I hope, why there are three different narratives of the system is because it's not consistent. It doesn't happen one way to everybody all the time. The other thing you have to remember is the goal of the legal system is to resolve the cases that were not closed by the criminal justice system. The goal of the criminal justice system is to use their resources to close cases. Open cases are bad. It means there's an inefficiency in the system. So now the legal system has to step in and try to resolve those cases to figure out why weren't they closed. The goal is not to find the truth. It's not to serve justice. It's not to protect and serve. It's not any other platitude. Those are lovely ideas. And those are the justifications for having this system. It's a middle-class run legal system, and we use this instead of other possibilities like popular justice, conflict resolution, alternative dispute resolution, restorative justice, etc. There's lots of other things that we could do to resolve conflicts. This isn't the only one, but this is the one that most people at least don't go up against. They seem to submit to it. And this, again, it's middle-class, quote-unquote, professional people that most of us have given up our power to, and we let them resolve the conflicts. think about this though. Judges defer to police and the justice system. They presume that they were right when they arrested people, submitted evidence, and so on. Their job is not to go through and find every mistake that police or the justice system made. You might ask yourself, whose job is that? The truth of the matter is it's no one's job, because that's not the point of the system. The system is to resolve cases, not keep cases open. So, who does that in our system? Journalists, but notice they do that less and less, right? They used to do it more and more. Independent journalists would try to find problems like this, but now it's mostly sensational and arguing to people who agree with them, right? And so there really aren't a lot of people. Now there are things called, criminal justice reform groups, judicial watchdogs, right? There are nonprofit organizations, especially, that try to do this, and to some extent, people in the Justice Department are supposed to do this, but again, right, that's not the goal of the system. So again, most of you are kind of coming from this needs revision, or you're working it out, and so you need to unlearn some of these concepts that you learned prior to this class, so that you can better understand how the legal system works. And so a lot of it is avoiding overgeneralizations, avoiding myths, avoiding these platitudes. You start to use the course concepts, and to start, giving yourself, maybe 2 or 3 arguments that you can start to use to help you see multiple points of view, to stop thinking that justice is going to be an automatic punishment, to kind of try to move beyond just your own single experience or your own view of legal system, and to start to see it as unequal, that not everybody is going to have the same power. And so that's really, when you get to the reading Violence in the Word, you're kind of supposed to understand that if the system is biased, then judges are going to be biased too, because they're going to be complicit not just with the bias, but with organized violence. And so what criminal law is organized violence. Instead of letting a mob or family members or people get revenge, again, we go to that upper middle class professional system where we're going to let somebody else resolve this conflict. And so law has to operate as a system of cues and signals to everyone in the system. And everyone in the system has to kind of go along with it. Otherwise, it'll start to be, you'll have a different kind of violence. You'll have a disorganized violence, or probably a better way to say that would be reorganized violence. You'd have what we typically call war, which is most of what you say when you say anarchy or chaos. What you really mean is war, that will have warring groups going up against each other. And so in the West, in America, we've used this upper middle class professional system of judges to try to stay between those groups and to resolve the conflicts. So that's how judges are complicit with this state organized violence, where we're saying that only the government should have the right to be violent. People can't go to the Capitol and start being violent like they did, right? We're saying, no, you can't do that. And here are these professional upper middle class people to tell you why. And so when judges are taking away somebody's life, that's the most obvious form of organized violence, but also when they take away their liberty. And again, now a lot of you, several of you, not a lot, but several of you made connections to the wrongful conviction. You said, well, okay, now I totally understand what's going on here, and that's why it takes place in a field of pain and death, is that's what judges are being asked to do. They're supposed to interfere with these situations where otherwise people would resort to self-help. And so this is kind of wrongful conviction is showing you that it's not always fair, because again, the system is biased. So of course judges are going to be biased as well. So the other thing you have to try to remember, and this is interesting, that so many students get this wrong, right, is that in the reading, right, so this is not an opinion, this is from the reading, what did Cover say? So in the reading, he reminded that there was an illegal violent beginning to the United States, and that's because they rebelled against the law of England. And so if law is a system of rules based on social norms, and there'll be consequences if you violate the rules, then there shouldn't be a United States of America. The United States should still be a colony, granted some independence like Canada and other places. And so you see kind of the contradiction there. But that's because the founders, the people who rebelled in the 1760s, they viewed the law very clearly as resist the law. They didn't think that the system of law in England was objective and fair, and so they saw that they had an ability to resist that law. So I wanted to point out also that this just kind of reveals there's different types of bias, right? So there's racial bias, there's gender bias, but there's also nationalist bias, right? So we see this, and we've been taught in America that the rebellion was a good thing, right? That it was right. But from the English perspective, and really from, let's say, a Haiti perspective or some other perspective, it's not so black and white. It's not so clear, right? It's kind of, well, what gave you the right to resist, but other people don't have the right to overthrow the government. Now, this also comes out, again, as understanding that, most of you got this correct, that Word in the Violence is the same story. It's just like the lottery. Unfortunately, most of you got it incorrect, that it's actually the creation of the idea of the executioner. In other words, giving someone, again, from an upper middle class professional background, this is your job, you're going to execute people. You've created a system by which now you have organized violence. You're saying, we're going to organize our violence through this person, the executioner. And so we do the same thing in the United States. So picking up the stone is not the first act, that's the third or fourth act. So the execution of someone is what happens at the end of the system, not the beginning of the system. The beginning of the system is when you create the role, when you create this person that says, we're going to use you instead of letting justice be popular or spontaneous. Now, what other people in the system have to receive this signal in order for it to work? It's everyone. Everyone, including the executioner, the police, the guards, right? Even everyday people have to really buy into this system in order for it to function. So Black Lives Matter protests were really questioning whether this system is valid and free from bias. And so you can kind of see the conflict there. So again, this is going to be difficult for you if you're still kind of thinking that law is one thing, that it's automatic, and you're still believing in this myth. It's going to be hard for you, right? If you believe in the social contract, you're really going to have a hard time here. But if you're starting to move towards, okay, I see that there's groups of people who are kind of competing within the system, and they're going to use law to either resist or dominate or try to win in a game-like situation, you're going to start to have a better idea, and you're going to start to see that there's multiple views of legality, and hopefully you'll start to then say, well, how come? Like, what's going on that creates these systems? And that's where you'll start to get to the concept of social construction, which really you should have learned in your sociology class or your intro to criminal justice class. But again, there's things you could look up on the internet or YouTube to learn more about the social construction of rules and reality. Now, I'm going to help you with that concept here in the very practical sense of just, you're used to thinking about an ideal perfect system because that's what a textbook talks about, or that's what a kindergarten teacher tells her students, right? But in that system, you'd have these 7 things. Now, it's a great idea to try to work towards these 7 things. I mean, that would be lovely, right? But it's not realistic when we look at the actual system, when we look at the facts. Black people are disproportionately stopped. So remember when we said judges are going to assume that the police were correct. So judges aren't making a judgment on police behavior. This is an article you're going to read shortly by Dr. Chapman. Then you see it on the other side is that so you've got unfairness in the system, you've got wrongful conviction in the system. It's mostly affecting Black and Hispanic individuals and to poor white people, poor Caucasian people. And so when they come out of prison, now they're discriminated against, and then of course they're more likely to commit a crime again, because that's the only system that they know where they can survive economically, because they're not being able to get employed in the legal economic system. The other issue here that we see is not perfect or is not ideal is that people who are supposed to be defending people from wrongful conviction, the public defenders and the criminal justice lawyers, are actually closing cases, right? They're participating or complying with the criminal justice system to close the case as opposed to fight the case. Now, of course, this is because they don't have enough resources and not enough people. But again, that just shows you the actual system has all sorts of problems that are nowhere near what an ideal perfect system would be. And so that's where you kind of just really got to let that sink in. Now, the second myth you really got to start attacking is this idea that judges are neutral or that they are there to ensure checks and balances. I mean, first of all, that's completely nonsense and wrong. And if you go back to your Federalist Papers and you read James Madison, you'll see that he didn't say that. He said, in fact, it's impossible to have separation of powers and checks and balances. He was just arguing it's kind of a silly idea in the first place that you would have such a thing. And it's not necessary. But again, right, your high school teacher probably didn't read that. And so you want to try and unlearn this idea that that's what judges are do, that they're neutral. Now, you can see the division here in the answer. Most of you want to separate the two things, violent and legal interpretation, when that's the opposite of what the reading just told you, is they have to be together, and the main point was judges are complicit with organized violence. And then another half of you wanted to view neutral and balance as the goal, right, between the violent and the peaceful, as if these are like forever labels that actually apply to people. And judges blithely ignoring the growing literature was true, but it wasn't the point of that particular passage. And so you have 3/4 of the class really buying into this myth of judicial neutrality and trying to find anything other than the idea that judges might be complicit. But even the idea of an independent or neutral referee isn't even real in real life either in sports. And so study after study has showed in all sports that superstars get preferential treatment. So the haves come out ahead. The people who have the most experience and have the most value to the system get treated better than the people who don't have that access. And that's the same thing in the legal system. And so when you saw in the narrative of Charles, who's a successful businessman, he's used the legal system over and over again. And so he sees it as a game because he thinks he can win the game, because he knows the rules and the procedures. So this has come out in studies that this is true. People who use the legal system more often are more likely to win. Those who are being accused, the defendants, they're very unlikely to win. And so again, the idea in a neutral system is just nonsense in both sports and in the legal system. It's a nice idea, but it's not accurate. So now hopefully we should start to see the recognition of different experiences, and that there's different power. That if you don't have power in society, you're not going to have power in the legal system. If you start to understand that the criminal justice system and legal systems, they are, I can imagine an ideal system, though I doubt I really could. I doubt anyone really could, but let's say we could. But then it's not happening in real life. In real life, there's just tons and tons of problems with the system. And so it's probably best to try to forget those ideals, at least as you're answering questions, because you're not going to do very well in a class like this if you continue to believe in the ideal, as opposed to the facts that are right here in front of you. And then you need to start referring to the course materials and referring to them correctly. So if a case says that judges are complicit with organized violence, that's what you need to have learned. That's reading comprehension, right? That you understood it. So this is what we mean by separating your moral and your intuitive judgment with the legal reasoning. So then just to kind of wrap up here is you have to start thinking about, like, law is not a thing, right? It's not something I dig up in the backyard. It's not an elephant. It's a metaphor. It's an abstract map. It's this thing that I'm saying, well, what if the world was great? Maybe there'd be some rules or some laws that we can benefit from. But the problem is that everybody sees the law differently. So some people see it as a spear. It's a form of domination. Some people see it as a fan. It's a way of distributing justice. Some people as a snake, it's sneaky and it's trying to come up against you. Some people as a tree, right? That's where you get the branches of government. The most ridiculous metaphor in my opinion. Some people as a wall, it's a block, it doesn't allow you to get in, say in the case of immigration. Some people as a rope, it's a way of moving up from the middle classes. But see, everybody has a different perspective because of their different experiences with the system. And so the kind of expectations about law is that the white Anglo-Saxon tradition, coming out of England in particular, was that the law is to serve the right to be left alone, that there shouldn't be any government interference. And so that's what you're hearing in the case in overturning Roe v. Wade. On the other hand, you'll hear people say, and some of the students said this, some people see law as an ideal for punishment. You're going to get what you deserve. Well, that contradicts the other idea, right? If you're supposed to be left alone, then what you deserve is to be left alone. So worst case scenario would be kicked out of the community. You wouldn't be controlled by the community, but that's not what everybody believes. Some people believe that punishment should be, I want you to sit in the corner and think about what you've done. I'm going to hold you in a concrete box until you apologize, right? That's very different than kicking somebody out of a community. Some people think it's ideal for social control, meaning that everybody will be watched, everybody will be you'll have surveillance everywhere, and so that therefore everybody will behave. instead of what really happens is people learn how to misbehave, right? Organized crime, ways of countering the surveillance, etc. And then there's some people who believe in human rights or natural rights and that you're born with this, and so you should be protected with these things. And again, that's a nice idea, but who's going to protect you with it, right? It's not going to do it. The elephant isn't going to appear and protect you. It's not actually a spear. And so this is the dilemma. So to try to remember this is that, you know, the three legal narratives, they're not separate, right? They're integrated and they're interrelated because they're based on people's experience of how they struggle through life. And so you need to understand that concept, but you also need to see that now that's why there's so much difference in your own narratives, right? So just within the class of the 13 responses, some of you are starting to see with the law, just from going through this process, you're starting to learn the concepts. Remember, it was a question mark earlier in this review video, and now there's evidence that some of you are now saying, okay, I get it. It's an adversarial system. It creates a struggle or a fight of different perspectives. It's going to be based on rules that I have to figure out just like a game, and I have to try to use them to my advantage. I have to think about my experiences and see if I have experience with the system, and then I'll be better able to use it, or I'm going to think that I have to fight it or it's coming out to get me, which is also accurate. And it's not designed for equality, so it was never designed to serve the justice or to find the truth. In fact, I'm not even aware of a system that's designed to do that, other than some couple okay movies. But you know, again, the system is designed to close cases. And so for those of you who, you know, are starting to understand this, that's great. For those of you who don't know, it's okay, right? You'll see there's division here in what encounters they've had, and so you just want to start maybe thinking a little bit more deeply about the situations that you've been in. And if not, then, you know, try to understand and learn from other students what they're going through. Or also, one thing that you're going to do this week is read about students in the past who have interviewed their parents. And so interview your parents, ask them what they think rights are, what justice is, what the legal system should do, and you'll start to get some different points of view because every member of your family has had a different experience. Now, some things will be the same, but some things will be different. Now, then I just wanted to make sure we're all checking in. I just wanted you to see most students feel like they're doing okay. They're keeping up with the coursework. I warned you, right? This is 6 weeks is very quick to try to get a lot of information. You're trying to get 13 weeks of information in 6 weeks. So you want to try to keep on top of it. It's definitely better to try to get your work done earlier in the week. Obviously, I'm not, tomorrow is the 4th of July. Many of you are going to participate. Many of you have to work. And so, you know, this is going to be the week where you could get behind. And so you want to try to keep up. I also just wanted you to see now, if law was what you thought it was when you came in, right? One thing, one set of rules. How come almost no one put that, right? So if it's about right and wrong, and if you don't follow the rules, you're going to have consequences, then why isn't that the answer? Only one student said that. The way we find out true and false, also laws and cases influence me in the life. So you see how they're even separating the two. So you see that there isn't one rule. There's not one law that dominates everybody's thinking. And most of you have from your family members what you think is right and wrong. Now, if you really thought about it and we started going deeper into this, we'd start to see cultural differences, right? History, your economic status, although most of you are in the same socioeconomic group, and so you're going to tend to see things pretty similar. Others of you, as you'll see here, have ideas about religion or God, and those influence your ideas. Those moral kind of beliefs, and those are going to be different for different people. And then, you know, the idea of news, social media, those things will also influence your friends, you know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, just to acknowledge that we do have 4 students who are trying to keep up with the coursework, and then 3 students who are about in the middle. And so, you know, again, this is maybe one of the reasons why we do ungrading, right? One of the reasons why we try to, you know, keep opportunities and have multiple opportunities to understand the materials. We're not just punishing students for falling behind. And so just something to think about when you're thinking about self-grading. Now, the last thing is just to give you a preview of next week, or this week, right, week 3. The sovereignty and migration reading is long, right? So this is one of those things where I'll just tell you, I want you to get, there's 3 different sovereignty narratives. There's 3 different stories about sovereignty. So you really need to understand what those 3 are And then you need to read the stories about the 3 different groups. So there's the Rohingya, Louis Jimenez and the Maya, and then Keshwar. And so they have 3 different experiences, and they have 3 different ideas about sovereignty means. And sovereignty is one of those taken for granted concepts that if you look on the internet, there might be one answer, but in reality, there's lots of different answers. And they change based on both your history and based on your social position. And so you need to be able to see that and really understand that. That will now start to help you understand a lot more about why law is malleable, right? Sovereignty is one of those legal concepts that makes it so that there's arguments based on your social status. I then made a presentation to help you understand these concepts a little bit better, and so that we're kind of really getting at understanding the A grade, understanding what those concepts are. And so you want to review that, memorize what you can, start to apply your learning, right? That's what I meant by building on the learning, and then take some time to critically reflect. There's a couple things you could do here that I recommend. One would be to get some cards or some pieces of paper and just write, right? Just try to rewrite as much as you can about what you remember. Try to have those be in like little short sentences, and just do it that way. Another idea would be to talk to your family members or your friends and share some of the ideas so you get different perspectives, and that will help you kind of narrow in on what you're learning and what you're still struggling with. And you could do the same thing with social media, obviously. Post some concepts on your social media and see how they respond to them. But getting out and just kind of getting some ideas floating. Now, you're also going to review some student essays from last semester. These are the people who interviewed their family members. So I just put them all together. You can skim these, right? Maybe you find a couple that really stand out to you that you like, and annotate those. You don't have to annotate all of the essays. I just wanted you to have access so you could see all of them. And so maybe you read 1 or 2. Most of them are about 3 to 5 pages, and they're separated by little lines there. So again, you skim those, and you just want to get a sense of what are some of the reasons why there are differences, what's causing the differences in the definitions of these legal terms. Then I gave you a diagram, which is, I think, as comprehensive as I can make it, to help you see the structure of the system, the hierarchy, how it goes from 9 to 3 to individuals, but then how that's also embedded or connected to our social system and how groups would then respond to that. And then I put some of the language in there so that you can kind of just get an idea of a visualization. And so I'd like you to try to work with that just to kind of supplement kind of the reflecting part that you're doing. And now we're going to have another discussion board, so I really want to see some engagement. Lots of you are engaging through annotation, which is great. So now I want you to carry that over to the discussion board and start to learn from each other. I've got an extra credit or a bonus assignment here where you can play the prisoner's dilemma game, and this is so I can help you understand the adversarial system, where you have to have winners and losers, where this is closing cases, and you'll see that there's no way out of it. Or at least there's no way out of it in the game, right? That you can always rewrite the game, and that's what I kind of hope that you pick up in the video. And then there's extra credit just again to see how much have you retained, are these principles starting to sit in with you, and how are you doing with it. So I hope this helps, and again, if you need additional help, just let me know.